The Jewish Story Podcasts. A Jew is never alone. How stories save lives. Martin Buber said, "We stand in a chain of narrators, a link between links." That chain is already 3,500 years long. More than anything else, that chain of narrators has told stories about the deemed presence and absence of two sides in a covenantal relationship between Jews and God. In today's podcast, we shall tell stories travelling on parts of that chain, from the Death March to the Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement, then from the streets of Tel Aviv to the Warsaw Ghetto, Auschwitz and back to Israel, and then move fast forward to October 7th and its aftermath. The inspiration for the title came from watching a YouTube video some years ago. My attention was grabbed by the title of the video, "Where Was God in Auschwitz?" In the video, a Holocaust survivor, Rabbi Mangel, then a teenager, described his experiences on the Death March. He began his talk by saying that a story had saved his life. I was very interested to find out how, indeed, a story could save a life. Rabbi Mangel told the following amazing story, an abridged version of which I will now tell you, but I highly recommend you listen to the full version. Rabbi Mangel was a teenage boy on the Death March, winter 1944. It was a severe winter. Young Mangel was wearing tough leather boots, which were far too big for him. So instead of lifting his foot up each step he trod in the snow, he had to drag his feet through the snow. Otherwise, he would have left his boots in the snow. However, each time he did so, the boot wore away whatever skin he had left on his leg, until eventually there was none left, and each step meant excruciating pain as the boot rubbed up against his bone. After a while, he realized that he couldn't carry on in such a way and decided to commit suicide. All he had to do was to go to the right or left of the column, and he would be immediately shot. As soon as he made this decision, a thought popped into his mind. He remembered a story that his father used to tell him. A villager who lived at the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, told his wife that he wanted to go to the Baal Shem Tov to get a blessing for the coming birth of their child. As the Baal Shem Tov only received people at night, he told his wife that he would very likely return the next day. And off he went. While waiting for the Baal Shem Tov, a messenger turned up with a message from his wife. "Come home immediately, I am in labor. The midwife cannot be found." The villager went straight to the Baal Shem Tov and asked him what to do. "Why, go home, of course," he replied. "But I am afraid to go home at night, to go alone through the forest, where there are some very unsavory characters." The Baal Shem Tov replied, "A Jew is never alone." Immediately after he remembered the story, a young boy drew up next to him and started chatting. This was unheard of, as nobody talked to anybody on the Death March. Everybody was totally focused on how to keep going and how to stay alive. As they talked more, Mangel discovered that this lad was from his hometown. He explained to him that he couldn't go on any longer and that he was going to move out of the column and get shot. And he asked him to notify his parents where and when he was killed. The lad said to him, "You crazy? Don't do such a thing. You will survive." Then he put his arm around him and dragged him along. After a few miles, it became too difficult for the lad to carry on, and so Mangel was back to where he started, and very soon he made up his mind again to commit suicide. And yet again the story, "A Jew is never alone," came to him. Immediately afterwards, another person appeared by his side. This time, however, it was an SS officer. Mangel decided to ask the officer to shoot him when he moved to the side of the column. The officer said to him, "Are you crazy? You will survive." He put his cap on Mangel's head, gave him some coffee to drink, and dragged him along the way. After a few more miles, they came to a village. The officer took back his cap, told Mangel where he could get some nourishment, and left. Rabbi Mangel's story from the Death March takes us back in time to the Baal Shem Tov, but the story doesn't stop there. We know that the Baal Shem Tov's father had died while he was still a child, and when his father felt death drawing near, he took the boy in his arms and said to him, "I see that you will make my light shine out, and it is not given to me to rear you to manhood. But dear son, remember all your days that God is with you, and that because of this you need fear nothing in all the world. Israel treasured these words in his heart. Rabbi Mangel, on the verge of despair, a hair's breadth away from committing suicide, remembered or was reminded of the story. A Jew is never alone. Was it simply coincidence, luck, chance, that immediately after each time the thought arose in his mind to commit suicide, he remembered the story, and then somebody came along beside him and persuaded him not to commit suicide and helped him along the way? This story invites the question, what power does a story have? Martin Buber wrote about the inherent power of the Hasidic story. Such a story constitutes help in itself, he said, and he gave a wonderful example. A rabbi whose grandfather was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov told a story about his grandfather. The grandfather was once asked to tell a story about the Baal Shem Tov, and as he described how the Baal Shem Tov prayed, he jumped up and down and danced. The grandfather, who was disabled, after telling the story, was cured of his disability. How can we understand such an event? According to Buber, God bestowed on the Hasidic Rebbe's divine light or energy. This light was manifested through the Rebbe's Torah's teachings and through his actions, that is, through his relationship with God and other human beings. The Hasidim who heard the Rebbe's teachings and witnessed his actions passed on the light of the Rebbe to the coming generations through their stories. We, the receiver of those stories, continue to pass them on. Buber's message was that the light that was originally there is here with us. It may be more or less intensely felt, but nevertheless it is here with us. And that is why the Hasidic story can constitute help in itself. And so we can indeed imagine that the light concealed within the story, which Rabbi Mangel remembered, could have had such a transformative effect on his dire circumstances. The second story began on the streets of Tel Aviv some 50 years ago. Early one morning, Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach was walking along an empty street when he came upon an old hunchback street sweeper. Shlomo, being Shlomo, began to talk to him. "Where are you from?" "Poland." "Were you there during the war?" "Yes." "Where?" "Warsaw Ghetto." "Did you know the Esh Kodesh, the Rebbe of the Piazetzna, the Rebbe of the ghetto?" "Yes," said Shlomo. "I've always wanted to meet someone who knew him. Can you tell me something about him?" "I was a young lad then, and my memory is not so good, but I do remember a song he used to sing time after time on the Sabbath, on Shabbat. The greatest thing in the world is to do someone a favor." "And what happened to you after the ghetto?" "I was sent to Auschwitz. There in the night I used to listen to people's stories. Everyone was so alone. There were times when I wanted to throw myself on the electric barbed wire and finish it all, but then I would remember the Rebbe's song. The greatest thing in the world is to do someone a favor. And I gave up the idea. "And how has life been for you in Israel?" "Very difficult. There were times when I had had enough of life. I'd walk into the sea up to my mouth, ready to finish it all. And then I would remember again the Rebbe's song, and I would turn around and go back to the beach." Remembering the song and the story were indeed sufficient. In both stories, young lads were thrown in at the deep end of life. Both were confronted by life-threatening situations. Both contemplated committing suicide, and both, at critical moments, remembered stories which saved their lives. According to the Jewish tradition, one cannot separate relationships between people and the relationship between people and God. For a relationship between people is a function of the relationship between us and God. And over 3,500 years of history, that relationship between Jews and God has been a play on the theme of the absence or presence of God. We can for sure follow this relationship back from the Holocaust to the time of the Baal Shem Tov and then further back to our ancestors. But that is for another time. Rather, I want to move fast forward in time to hear from two people who were kidnapped into Gaza on October the 7th and released after 55 days in captivity. Sapir Cohen, a 29-year-old woman, felt miracles in the tunnels under Gaza. She had what she called a spiritual revelation. The minute she shifted her attention from her own suffering to someone else. She saw a 16-year-old girl who needed help. She wanted to save her, to make her happy. she immediately felt powerful. She thanked God for bringing her to that place, to the tunnels of Gaza. Yagel Yaakov, a 13-year-old boy, wrote in a post after his release, "What kept me going in captivity was the belief that I am not alone. Even though Hashem, God, didn't succeed in preventing my capture, He for sure looked after me in captivity. I felt that He protected me in captivity from all evil. When I returned, I told everyone that I want to put on a kippah, yarmulke, and tzitzit, and everyone laughed in my face." Let me finish with a very short personal story. A few months ago, I went into a stationery shop. The saleswoman, who I was acquainted with, remarked that waking up in the morning was waking up to despair. She was referring to the fate of the kidnapped in Gaza. I didn't respond because I felt I had nothing to say. Several minutes later, after I had left the shop and I was on my way home, I remembered or was reminded of the story which I understood could have been my response to her despair. At the time, it was inaccessible. I remembered the words of a son of a Holocaust survivor who told how his father had managed to stay alive. His father, at times of despair, would say to himself, "I can always despair tomorrow." We have in this podcast very briefly touched upon some important dimensions regarding Jewish stories. At times of emergency, distress, difficulty, telling ourselves or others a story may be sufficient to achieve salvation. Telling stories can indeed save lives. To know the story of an old Tel Aviv street sweeper with a hunchback is to know that the greatest thing in the world is to do a favor for someone. To know the story of a teenage Jew on the death march wearing boots too big for him is to know that a Jew is never alone. To know the story of a kidnapped woman in Gaza is to know that giving to another at times of great distress can transform suffering and helplessness into spiritual power. Please pass on these stories.